Welcome to Cures and Capital, the podcast on value creation in biotech and pharma. I'm Martin.
And I'm Simon. And today we are joined by Jun Tang, a founding partner of InScienceWeTrust, a biotech business development consulting firm that enables biotech companies and academics to maximize their potential in the Western and APAC healthcare markets.
So, Simon, what can our listeners look forward to in this episode?
So this episode is dedicated to the Chinese biotech boom, and Leon, he will give us the inside story of the past, present, and future of that boom. We will discuss China's role in the global biopharma R&D space. We'll discuss how China is changing pharma's business model. And we'll also discuss biotech in China from the perspectives of growth, the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. And after our interview with Leon, Martin and I will go over our reflections and takeaways as usual.
And as always, all views and opinions expressed in this podcast are our own and do not represent that of our employers. Now please welcome Jun Tang.
Hello, Leon. Thank you for coming on the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
I have been listening to your podcast in the past few weeks and really enjoyed it. And hopefully I can bring something a little bit different from what you guys have been talking about.
No, I'm absolutely sure. And finally, the time has come where we're going to discuss the Chinese biotech scene. But before we dive in, could you maybe give our listeners a short background on what's your bio, Leon?
Yeah, sure. My first, I would say 25 years was in China, born there, educated there, and went up to master degree in China, and then went to the States for my PhD, which specialized in nanomaterial, cardiovascular disease, and immuno-oncology. And obviously, immuno-oncology at that time, let's say more than a decade ago, was really hot. So I continued my postdoc training focused on immuno-oncology, with a little bit spin from the angle of radiopharmaceutical. I was very fortunate to speak from a radiopharmaceutical perspective. Long story short, after my training with the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center as a radiation oncology research fellow, I want to emphasize I was never a medical doctor. And then went to Wall Street. First job was a junior analyst for a VC fund under a nonprofit, which is probably something especially audience from Europe understood this very well. But it was quite new for me, especially my first job out of academia. So I was there for 3 years. And then really want to join this pretty alluring investment community in the US. So I went to Barclays after 3 years with that as a junior nonprofit venture finalist, went to Barclays as a sales head analyst, covered SMID-cap biotech for about 1 year. Learned a ton. I would say that probably was the best crash course I ever had to get into the investment community, especially in the biotech and biopharma industry. After that, I'm really encouraged by the rise of China biotech. I was not sure, but I said, why not give a try? I was still relatively young. So I joined this company called Shanghai Hernias, which is one of the top biotech headquarters based in Shanghai. But I never worked from their Shanghai office. I had been always in the US. I was their head of a search evaluation of a business development and have a small team, and I was there for 2 years. And then during the 2 years, I was fully convinced the China biotech is coming. At that time, people still debate, should we do like a in-global for China, which it means that you in-license the Western companies' innovation and develop them for the Chinese market, or, which I believe are really going to be the trend at the time, is China for global. So China as a source of innovation, and then the export the innovation to Western companies. So I said, well, this is an opportunity only happen like once every decade, if not once a lifetime. So I started my own company, which is called InScienceWeTrust BioAdvisory. We call ourselves InScienceWeTrust BioAdvisory for short. InScienceWeTrust, I think that's probably the biggest denominator among people in our industry. It doesn't matter where you came from, right? From Asia, from North America, from Europe, Latin America, Africa. Really, the reason you want to take the drug because there's tons of scientific data and research behind it. I've been there for 3 years. My company is still kicking, slowly growing. And in the meantime, actually, about 5 years ago, started my own nonprofit called InScienceWeTrust Community. That's where actually Simon, you and I probably crossed the path. I did a lot of posting or stuff on behalf of the community, which I founded. Now we have a small army of volunteers. We do monthly webinar. We actually have quite a few European big pharma biotech speakers recently, and we do newsletter. Of course, the favorite of mine is the social media platform. We do WeChat, in case you don't know, the second most popular messaging app in the world. We also do WhatsApp, actually, which is number one, to my knowledge. And we have LinkedIn. That's about myself. Hopefully, a little bit long, but I give you a little bit of background why I get invited by Simon and Martin.
Yep, and I think it's very important that the listeners understand you're an insider to this. You understand biotech across the geographies. And we talked a little bit before, and we agreed that we wanted to use the American Association for Cancer Research, the AACR,
Right.
a recent meeting in Chicago. So let's use that and see if we look at that meeting as a case study for where is the Chinese biotech today, and then later on we can dive into the past, present, and future. But you went to that meeting in Chicago, and I guess as you prepared to go to that meeting, you probably browsed through your wonderful book of abstracts.
Right.
What did you see as you prepared?
So this is gradually increasing in terms of share of Asian biotech abstracts, right? So obviously ACR is heavily focused on academic research, a lot of cancer, basic cancer, or translational cancer research, right? And then I think the presentation from industry, especially biotech, have been increasing. Among the portion of abstract by biotech, the China biotech percentage has been increased dramatically. Obviously, to give people the idea, the abstract book have over 7,000 abstracts. The number one data vendor from China publish an abstract that based on all the abstracts, categorize them. So that's where I get started and use some software, went to everything. And my focus actually in one, probably two, I would say would be antibody drug conjugate, ADC, and the T-cell engager. That's a two topics really focus on because I have a client going there. And so I can tell you, you already know there's more than 7,000 abstract, right? That's total 233. China about half of them. China about a contributor half of them. And followed by US probably like 30%, then Europe 20%, and everyone else. That's the situation for ADC. So I want to use ADC as a kind of glimpse, the China kind of biotech evolution, right? Of course, this is ACR. They have their kind of independent editorial or like the review committee. It's not like you give to them, they're going to accept it. They have a peer review process, right? So that's just tell you there's a quite good innovation from China in the ADC space. Similar situation with the T-cell engager, which is another topic. Probably it's not as much as ADC. From the, let's say, about like over 100 abstract out of China, there's a lot of innovation. So give people a little bit background on what ADC really is. You know, people call them magic bullet. Sometimes they call them precision chemo. That's more kind of a like common man's language, precision chemo. But let's say if you use the fancy word magic bullet, right? They use ADC as a GPS guiding device, and then they deliver the toxin typically attached to the antibody to the tumor cell, in this case, oftentimes. That's how it works. Very simple, right? When the drug sounds very simple, the challenge must be engineered. People just keep in mind, if the biology, everything is very simple, concept is simple, the reason why someone going to win out, they must out-engineer other people. That's exactly where I would say the good feature of China biotech. People call them super me too. That's what the Financial Times call them. Or people call them, how to say, fast follow. That's oftentimes the US Wall Street Journal, New York Times would call them. But give or take, you guys have a lot of competitive landscape people and the commercial people on the podcast and never say we have to have a first-in-class drug to become blockbuster. They're oftentimes not the case. It's always like a third, or fourth, even fifth drug on the market, especially for the gigantic market. Actually, that one become a bestseller instead of a first one. For the ADC, that's exactly, I think the future may hold for China biotech. The ADC is really, you have to be very good at engineering. And those guys are really good at engineering. And first of all, they have a lot of talents. Actually, they were trained like me in the US, but I chose finance, business development. A lot of them stayed in the R&D track for 2 or 3 decades, typically 2 decades, and then went back to China, set up their shop. So they pretty much know that trick, the know-how of how to develop a drug. Now with the full back of a cheap labor government support and a very dedicated workforce. So that's really allowed them to out-engineer their competitors or their peers from the West. And the ADC is a very good example over there. Not only, there's a lot of pretty innovative ideas, right? So you have a bispecific, you target 2 targets and then done. You have a dual payload, which means that you are, if you think ADC is a precision chemo monotherapy, why not do like a precision more chemo combo therapy, which is a dual or triple payload. And then you have a smart linker, right? You have this antibody GPS and the payload, which is a drug. Why not once they get into the tumor microenvironment, when there's some tumor-specific figure present, then you unload your missile or your bomb, whatever metaphor you want to use it. And there's a lot of innovation if you look and go through this, about 100 abstract out of China. So that's my impression. And also you can tell when they presented it, including one of my clients, there's a lot of interest from big pharma, biotech investors from the West to talk to them. We can get into this later on about deal flow space, but I can see how the initial spark was generated for future deal flow. I'll stop right there.
I think that was a fantastic overview of that innovation from China. And when you actually went to the conference, what was the atmosphere? What was your impression of being there?
Yeah. So again, ACR is really basic research, translational research, and early stage therapeutic development data, right? They don't really have a lot of late stage clinical presentation, most of like preclinical and phase 1, right? So they give you a kind of idea what's the future oncology drug may look like, typically 5 or 10 years from now. So with that in mind, I would say compared to some of the peak years of ACR, overall feeling is not as big as before. So I've been going to ACR quite a few times. I think that unfortunately, US is a very hostile environment against the scientific community, and the biotech is real. You can really feel it. And also a lot of people, international attendees, I think I talked to a few of them, they actually voiced concern. They said they could have a single, let's say 5 people here, now we only have 3. Because the other 2, they may get a block because they're not U.S. citizen, but we have 3 are U.S. citizen, holding a passport, we don't worry about it. Yeah, so that kind of things happen. It's just anecdotal information. We don't have the statistics, right? Obviously, but the crowd is not as big as some of the peak years. I was like 2019, 2020, or 2021. Those years, I think I feel like more busy than this year. Then in terms of a conversation, I mean, in the academic community, people know very well China is catching up. Actually, you guys sit in Europe, you probably be closer to Nature publishing group, right? You probably heard about Nature Index. Nature Index, even a few years ago, showed that China published the largest number of high-profile papers in many industries except for life sciences, right? Life sciences, basic research still US #1, China #2, but I recently saw data showed that in cancer research, China passed the United States. Basic research round. That's a big milestone. Chemistry, physical sciences, material, China is way ahead of the United States, which is #2, right? So in life sciences, the first subsector China broke through the kind of leading position of the US is cancer research, which, as we all know, is the most lucrative disease area, in the scale of 20 years in pharma. Of course, today obesity is good, but we know obesity, all those kind of come and go. Oncology always there. Right? Oncology always there. I think that's be interesting. They know very well China scientists in cancer research in space is very competitive, and they are leading in some space as well. And there's one more thing. There's an event called China Night and Summit. It's pretty much like a 2 media/service provider organized this, so packed over there. It's crazy. They run out of food, and way more people show up than they plan. So they have to order like 20, 30 boxes of a pizza. It was like, wow, China Night don't have pizza.
But I think it really shows just how impressive the Chinese biotech scene built there. Are there any other therapy areas, and also maybe regarding modalities? What about, neurology, small molecules, or is it just oncology and the more complex biologics?
Yeah, full disclosure, this is going to be a little bit self-promotion, but it's based on paper I just published, I think one month ago on Nature Review Drug Discovery. Hopefully Simon can put a link over there.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, actually just use that one, and I can verbally describe this since there's going to be a podcast and people are going to listen to this while driving. Safe driving, please. Don't look at the chart. So what the chart said is really, if you look at what China, people know the headline, right? Defaults like JP Morgan this year, everywhere, big pharma in license 31% of their externally sourced asset from China in 2024. That's like a headline. So I expand out a little bit more, include not just big pharma, also biotech and the VCPE fund. They are the three major category of licensee. That's like a jargon we use in BD space, right? People who buy stuff. You put all those together, and actually surprised me. China actually last year, if you look at just those good deals, which means analysts with the tens of millions of upfront payment, China licensing deal booked $8.4 billion US dollars. It's not a small number, 8.4 billion. But given that a lot of those proceeds actually go to their Western investors. So typically, those are China biotech before they had this big, sometimes even over 1 billion deal. They did a crossover or last round of financing. And oftentimes Western investors such as like R Capital, Ally Bridge, Forbion, General Atlantic, Fanova partner can join. It's really good, a very good IR. I'm telling you, if someone can plot this data, what's the valuation they got, how much they get when you exit, fantastic return. Anyway, so that's 8.4 billion, probably half of them went back to China. So now with this pie of about a 50 deal, 48 to be exact, when I look at them, most of them, I think it's most, which means half, went to biologics, which include ADC, bispecific, or like a multi-specific biologic fusion protein, something like that. About 1/3 went to small molecule, and then everyone else. Oh, by the way, there's not even one single major deal out of China in cell and gene therapy last year. And China right now, based on the recent report from their Tsinghua University, which is a #1 ranked university out of China in the world, based on the recent report, China, 28% of their pipeline asset, I think is 28%, are in cell and gene therapy and 0 deal last year. Very interesting. But I know to give you the idea, biologic dominant, followed by small molecule, now everyone else. Now, if you talk about disease area, I think #1 still oncology, if I'm not mistaken. And then I&I and autoimmune disease, like follow quickly, and then followed by obesity. Right. So this is a little bit different from the deal flow actually from the rest of the world. I think the rest of the world, last year, and this I&I and / autoimmune diseases, and oncology comparable, but China oncology absolutely dominant. This also go back to the history of a China biotech industry, which is relatively young, especially think about the innovative drug industry in China. I think they really become a serious player starting about 10 to 5 years ago. So a lot of companies formed during this past 10 years, they either own into oncology or at least have very strong oncology pipeline or like a presence. So that's why there's such a strong weight of oncology in China innovative biotech industry.
So, Leon, let's now try to understand how Chinese biotech rose to where it is today. And I think we did a lot of this in some shape or form in the previous questions, but could you really paint the picture and share some figures of the role that Chinese biotech plays in the biopharma landscape today? And you mentioned the deal size, at least to some extent, but there's so much more impressive data that are coming out lately.
A lot of our audiences, probably in finance or business, are going to use those kind of finance jargon. There's a lagging factor, right? There's a kind of a leading factor. I think the deal making is really a lagging factor. They don't reflect what the China biotech really is today. It's reflect what they were 2 or 3 years ago. So if you use that metaphor, I think the reason why they are today, several factors. #1, I think, is really the talent, right? So we use the word sea turtle, right? That's we call a lot of China biotech execs call themselves sea turtle, which is returnee. Sea turtle, if you say in Chinese, which means 海龟, in Chinese 海龟, they pronounce exactly the same as sea turtle, but actually means overseas returnee. In Chinese means overseas returnee, but if you hear it, it sounds like a turtle. That's why they call themselves turtle, right?
Yeah.
So those people are very similar to me, but typically 10 to 20 years, or sometimes some of them of my age. They're very similar treating background like myself. Went to college all the way in China and a PhD and work in the US biotech biopharma for 5 to 10 years and went back to China. So those people really, they're like the core of the talent. They're the spark, right? The number doesn't need to be very huge because every biotech only need one CEO and one CSO, right? You have 2 people and have a team. And don't forget, China produced 4 times the STEM graduates as the US today, right?
Wow.
Keep that in mind. And now people say, wow, MIT student can be much better than the people from Tsinghua. Not quite. Give you one example. BYD, their CEO, was not trained in the US. He was trained in the best institute in China, number one. Number two, a second case study, DeepSeek. And hopefully you don't have a traumatic experience. I don't think European have it, or some American may. That guy, right, the CEO, Wenfeng Liang, he was trained in one of the best universities in China, never worked a day outside of China, never worked seriously in those like top tech company in the world, like Western one, right? And he's graduate, he's like a core member for DeepSeek. Our bunch of top graduates from Tsinghua University, Peking University, some of the best universities in China. But just look at the result, ignore the facade and the prestige, comparable. I would argue the same with the biotech. Right, I work in China biotech for 2 years. Biotech, you don't need to be super high IQ, right? It's engineering work. You have just tweak it, right? Especially for chemists, medicine chemists, you're feeling, right? Where you want to at this massive group where there's again, a little bit bound, that kind of a fingertip feeling, right? You have a lot of people like that in China because you remember how China came from. Initially, they were very competitive, high volume, like CRO, like WuXi AppTec and WuXi Biologics. You will be surprised how many CSO, CEO, or let's say even CBO in China, some of the best biotech companies spend many years with WuXi, either WuXi AppTec, WuXi Biologics, or some of the other CRO provider. So they get trained, right, by working on hundreds of projects, and then they have this kind of know-how.
Just for my understanding, so those scientists and tech leaders trained in the US, what is that motivates a person to go back to China? Why are they taking the plane to work in China instead of in Boston if they have the choice?
I think there's a push and there's a pull. There's for them, a lot of them actually pull and a little bit push. There's one quote, I didn't say it, someone else said, and it's put in this report from Stifel. I didn't say that bad word, Stifel found it. They said they actually quoted one of the executive anonymous from China, said, you know what, why I left the US big pharma job is that we did the work, and after 20 years, I did not get the VP job you promised me. So now I left you, I went back to China, get a funding, get a team. Now I have a drug which you can take your lunch, eat your dinner, don't complain. That's pretty much it. Someone from China, biotech executive said, right? But also that generation executives talent, right? They're the best people, don't get me wrong. They're the best of the best from China, right? They went to States, and do you think they will be satisfied or retire as a director? That's oftentimes what happening. They underutilize their talents, right? They're ambitious people. They know how to do job. They probably not, their English probably is not good. They just don't know the Western culture, the facade, how to body to golf, to yard. They don't know that. They didn't grow up with that. But that's important. They didn't know, and they didn't have the opportunity. And then, now to tell you the pull, and why I said it's a push, right? The pull is the Chinese government, one thing good about a communist or like a socialism country, or whichever you believe, is they have a long-term vision. They say the biopharma industry is something I want to build as one of the strategically important industry. Well, we need to take a loss for 10 years or 20 years, right? So we're going to invest in university, open those majors, open a major of drug development, by medicine and chemistry. I remember during that time, there's a lot of a school of pharmacy open in China, right? They train the talents, medicine and chemistry, those kind of stuff, and tons of capital.
Yeah.
Right? Remember, people today forgot, before the US and China get in this kind of nasty rivalry, a lot of the top Western funds, especially US VC fund, actually have an office in China that directly invest in Chinese biotech company, right? Remember OrbiMed, like a Sequoia? People probably forgot about Sequoia, right? They have a huge office in China until they had to change the name, right, to Hongsan, which is like a Chinese pronunciation of Sequoia, right? Like a Matrix Partners, right? Even like General Atlantic, they have a huge office in China. That really bring, as you can see here, you need a talent, right? You need a capital, you need the incentive. And that time people even believe China could have a easily comparable, if not larger, market as the United States, right? The beautiful idea is that China has the largest middle class, want to get rich, they want to have a high quality drug, and Chinese middle class is 700 million, it's twice the size of US like population. So automatically it would have shown the innovative drug market should be at least the same, if not double. Makes sense. And
Yeah.
because of that, capital come in, talent come back, and the university pumped a lot of mid to low level workers. You have a leader from the US, the Chinese American, by the workers. And then on top of that, they give a huge spark, which is the open of the capital market and the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Before, the capital market for biotech didn't really exist. And then the openness market, right? Now they invest, wow, this is a full cycle now. Well, you can invest, there's a talent, there's do things really fast, you go to IPO, and you exit. So that's during that kind of, I would say, prime time for 10 years, just attract all the factors together. But here's one thing didn't pan out as people expect, we probably can get into later. That's actually due to why the licensing boom. That's one thing people did not expect actually going to be so bad. We can get into that.
Perfect. And then now you mentioned basically two factors that led the growth, right? Is the talent returning, or a lot of talent being created, educated directly in China, and then the capital starting to flowing in. You mentioned that this industry, it rose to prominence fairly young, right? 5 to 10 years.
Right.
But I assume we
10
need
years,
to...
I would say.
Yeah, 10 years. But is it that the trend started to shift 10 years ago, or we have to look even further back for when the change started to really happen?
Sometimes the statistical trends looks not really specific. I would suggest people follow two companies out of China. Both of them are not legally not a Chinese company anymore. One is Beijing, or B1, a Swiss company, originated from Beijing, literally Beijing, in Beijing. So that's the one. Another one is Legend Biotech. Right now, I believe it's a US biotech, but originated from Nanjing of China, which is a kind of incubated subsidiary of the CRO, GenScript, based in China. If you look at the two companies' trajectory, they reflect the trend of China biotech perfectly. Right. When they started, especially Beijing, start with when the government, when the talent return and everything kind of start picking up. Before, people wanted to do this, but they're missing a lot of key factors for the market. So it didn't really go up really fast. When the talent started return, capital get in, government put this as a strategically important sector, and then people get rich. That's very important. When Chinese get rich, they can afford, at least the people think they can afford the innovative, expensive drug, right? And then people always, the VCs bet on the future. They look at all those factors, all the ingredients there, so they start betting on this. And talent also get the comments, go back. So I would say that's pretty much why I would say the China biotech boom probably started about 12 to 30 years ago, maybe over a decade.
And I think now you summarized a lot of factors, right? And again, also the boom is impressively quick. If you were to crystallize the example of biotech in China into maybe a playbook, now you gave some examples that we could follow to establish a vibrant biotech scene somewhere else.
Right.
What would be your key points? Could Africa or India, could they do the same in the same amount of time if they just put the talent and the amount of money? Can they have a vibrant biotech scene in 10 to 12 years?
Before I answer that, remember I said that they expect all those like important ingredients, except for one didn't pan out. That one was really, really negative, put it lightly, which is a market, right? Remember, I assume Chinese get so rich. The truth is actually, if you look at living standard of people from Shanghai, very comparable. People would tell very comparable to, let's say, from New York, San Francisco. People would even argue it's even safer, right? So you're assuming the market going to be there. Let me give you a number actually from the report. I believe right now the China innovative drug market is about 1/10 or even less of the US innovative drug market. Why is that? Very simple. Extreme price control by the government, right? So people sometimes wonder how a market or innovative or industry get broken. You have a controlled market, and there's one dominant player. They don't care whether you make a profit or not. That's where you destroy a market. So that's pretty much a Chinese innovative drug market, right? Because a single payer system, in China, as a regular low income, mid income citizen, given the means of the country, is pretty good. Why? 97%, I believe, people have insurance in China. That's pretty high, much better than the United States. And everyone, if you don't resist, you may have a basic coverage, like basic drugs. But because of that, there's only one customer in China if you want to sell drug and scale, which is government. And there's no province by province negotiation. You negotiate with the central government, right?
So why is that China market component so important
Yeah. So now let's go back. Probably after this, I go back to your question, Martin, whether India or Africa can have this industry. If you think about it, you guys know this much better than myself. If you follow the assets value based on their development stage, right? Preclinical, I probably give NPV. If you look at let's say, just look at the transaction, right? Like average median, preclinical probably is like tens of millions, right? That's how much people willing to pay. Phase 1 around 100 million, right? Phase 2, like a single digit hundreds of millions, let's say 2 to 5, right? Approved, or phase 3, pretty much you guarantee going to approve a couple billions, depends on give or take, right? That's where it is. So if you look at China, what they're good at, their transaction really focus on preclinical and phase 1. That's a problem, right? Vast majority of value, they couldn't acquire, they couldn't retain to themselves. Why they couldn't get into the second part? Like I said, the people who return to China, they are protein engineers, chemists, right? Biologists. I didn't say they are doctors. I didn't say they are physicians, scientists, or like a bankers or lawyers or something. But if you think about it, a lot of biotech we saw in the US, for example, a lot of our biotech are actually physician scientists, their CEO, right? They really just focus on clinical development, right? And deal making, commercialization, those kind of stuff. That China biotech have a huge disadvantage in terms of talents and a connection. Just give people the idea, because the upfront payment last year about 8.4 billion, half of them may go back to China, 4 billion. Big deal? No, not at all. Don't forget 2023, the total biotech transaction, M&A, is over $140 billion. That's how much the US biotech did, right? So China biotech fraction, rounding error. But so always people keep that in mind. So that's hopefully address your question, why they want to do this? Of course they want to do this. But so far only 2 companies really made it. Beijing, Legend, nobody else. And based on someone's statistics, China has about 5,000 biotech biopharma companies today, right?
Wow.
And only 2 really commercialized by themselves or with the help of a big pharma of their innovative drug in the Western market, which allowed them to capture the vast majority of the value of their innovation. The others couldn't.
Can I ask, Leon, maybe just to follow on, now we were discussing a lot of Chinese nationals that were educated abroad and then they moved back. But do we also start to see that China starts to attract international talent? So they would acquire these capabilities that they maybe missed to get clinical development and try to do it themselves?
Of course. I would suggest people go to visit the website, the B1. Look at how many East Asian faces you can see over there. That's probably already answered your question. Also, B1's CEO is American business person, John Aller, right? Yeah. So he's one of the early mover. There's quite a few other talents. I think Structure Therapeutics have a huge R&D team in Shanghai. But if you look at the management team, you would never guess they have a big R&D team in Shanghai, right? So that is happening, obviously, right? And a lot of new companies, the new China biotech company, the talent is like executive level talents are mixed, right? You need someone like a CSO or sometimes even CEO if they really heavily leverage Chinese R&D capability and even capital market need to be East Asian or well connected over there. Now you have a talent so well entrenched in the Western clinical development, commercial capital market. So I think that's a new breed of biotech, right? You have a best of 3 worlds, right? China, US, and Europe, right? That's pretty much it. Where it's going to be. There's some new companies. If even you don't have the Chinese or let's say East Asian talents, you at least get their assets, right? That's a new call. And one of the largest ones, Verdiva, is a British company with all kind of a typical, very diverse management team, but backed by 3 Chinese assets. So that's another thing. A lot of people, especially some like the government, don't like how globalized our industry really is. But our industry, our company are the best when they really utilize different kind of territories advantage. So right now, I really don't think China biotech are very strong in terms of clinical state and clinical development, commercialization, BDN licensing, or capital market or fundraising. That really, not to mention commercialization, like I said, only 2 are able to do commercialization on the kind of a global market out of 5,000. To tell you, they're really good.
And now just to follow up back on the original question, right, about could other countries get inspired and do the same? And if now, for example, Middle East sees what China did and they say, we have the money, now all we miss is the talent. Do you think we could see similar shifts and similar other scenes being built up in the same way that China was?
Yeah, so I think the two things really I have to give a credit because I'm one of the beneficiary of this Chinese government support for STEM education, right? I remember when I graduate school, I tell my American classmate how much I paid for my college, they were shocked. Pretty much I pay nothing, right? And they have to pay a lot of money. So that's number one. The support of the Chinese government to their higher education is, at least given their means, is absolutely by their own class, period, right? So that's a talent part. Like I said, China produced 4 times the size of STEM educated graduates than the United States. Keep that in mind, which probably also means 4 times as the graduate from Europe. That's the biggest barrier, right? You need a lot of highly educated engineers, chemists, scientists in this industry, because this, in a sense, is I would say it's a highly educated, labor-intensive industry.
Yeah.
It's labor-intensive, but it's a highly educated labor-intensive, right?
And now, aren't those conditions in place in, let's say, India?
I don't know. I don't know enough about India. I know India have very good IT industry, but my understanding, if just like a top-ranked university, if you put China among Asia, I think if you're including Hong Kong, China probably have the largest number of a top-ranked university. India probably have IIT. They do have a lot of CEO. In the US, I graduated from IIT, Indian Institute of Technology, if you don't know, as absolute number one, but not just one institute, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at the Great China, including mainland China, Hong Kong, I think top 100, they probably have one high single-digit number of university in top 100 in the world already.
Yeah.
So that's going to be hard, I think. And also this take time, right? Don't forget that China sent a lot of their best people to the States and Europe, and spend accumulative together probably tens of thousands of years of time working those big pharma, biotech, or like even those kind of industry, and then brought those know-how back to China. So that's also hard to catch up immediately. So that's take time.
Maybe we cannot run the playbook on the African continent because these conditions are not in place today, but then you have to start today and then you'll be in a different place in 20 or 25 years. So it's a long journey. So right now, what we are actually seeing is the harvest of all the long-term investments out of China for training and getting people back. So it's actually more complex than it maybe seems on the surface. Yeah.
Right.
Liang, can you help us understand the Chinese biotech industry and the individual companies, how they operate in practice? So what does it actually look like if I have my feet on the ground and I look around? Is it concentrated in one area, in one city? I mean, what does the building look like? What is actually going on? Does it look like Boston?
It's actually quite different from Boston, I have to tell you. So I think China being run by a communist party, they like planning. And they have a very little resistance when they need to demolish area and dedicate this for certain industry, right? So in China, have all sort of biotech park, industry park. It's literally a park, huge, complex, have everything together. So I actually visited the Bio Bay, which is probably the second largest park in China, based in Suzhou, where even the biologics are located, one of their largest company, and there's a lot of big pharma's R&D center over there. I believe the largest one in Shanghai, in Zhangjiang, right? That's the largest one. Also passed by. I didn't really visit their factory, but did visit the factory in Suzhou, which is second largest. It is a city. Don't get me wrong. It is a city, right? It's like a block, like a Manhattan, but every block is either one company like Innovent that just took the whole block, everything's there, or there's a kind of a biotech building, have a multiple company over there. By the way, Profound was there. The company acquired by GenMat, probably not far away from where you guys stay, was there in the industry park over there. So then you have this huge advantage, right? Typically, they do a park next to university. Like there's a reason why Shanghai is so big, because you have a world-class university and a hospital concentrated in Shanghai. So if you look at what biotech really about, you need an innovation compound university, right? Or you have a talent compound university. And then you put them together, you get some ideas, start working on this. You need tons of a service provider, right? You need like a CRO do like a medicinal chemistry for you. The CRO do like animal testing for you. Then what? You're going to do clinical trial, right? Then Shanghai have a huge advantage. Don't forget, Shanghai has a population of 25 million people. And their living standards really middle class, comparable to New York City. They have a lot of world-class teaching hospital, right? Now imagine if you have a molecule you want to do first human trial in Shanghai. By the way, Shanghai 25 million. If you do like a Yangtze Delta together, I think there's 100 million people over there. And they have a lot of world-class university, all this kind of thing. Oh, by the way, Gang said, okay, this is so big, commuter must be hard. The first time I took a high-speed train from Shanghai to Suzhou, only took me half an hour. I was like, wow, time-wise, it feels like a Manhattan. That's how much time it's going to take from, let's say, Columbia University to NYU, right? Even there are two industry park apart.
Wow.
Right? This go back to China's infrastructure. When you do this kind of a biotech is like a tweaking, right? Those engineers, they tweak stuff. They do a little bit, then do the iteration. Imagine your CRO, your animal tester CRO, and your physician, the scientist, and the university, pretty much all in a half an hour commute radius. How many touch points you would have? Let's talk about Europe. I cannot recall Europe have such a location like this. So China have you already told you there's two, Shanghai, there's one, Suzhou, there one, the two biggest, right? Guess what? The Chinese local government try to compete for this. I mean, they start building this in their locality. Another one you probably heard recently, there's a lot of a deal, especially ADC Kelun, where has a deal with the Merck, and the System Immune have a deal with the BMS ADC. If I tell you where this company located, you will be surprised. They're not in Shanghai, not in Suzhou, not in Nanjing. They're in Sichuan, where they sit next to Panda. There's a what? How could that happen? But it's happening because the Sichuan local government believe this is one of the important industry. They also set up a biotech industry park and they invite a lot of companies to go there. And don't forget, Sichuan have the second most populous province in China. So they have one of the largest, if not the largest, teaching hospital in China. So they can do trial really fast. So we were surprised out of nowhere, Sichuan, so all of a sudden become so strong with the innovative biotech stuff. It's weird. They were not on the map 5 years ago.
Also, as we dive deeper into the performance metrics and speed of Chinese biotech, can you explain a little bit what is the stakeholder dynamics in China? So you mentioned the government, of course. What about regulators,
Right.
the companies,
Right.
and you mentioned the universities. Is that different from the US?
They are trying to copy the model in the US and then give a very strong Chinese speed for this. Even like the China FDA used to, China equivalent of FDA used to call CFDA. Then they feel like the copycat, let's say, image is too strong. They change it and call it NMPA, National Medical Product Agency. Used to call CFDA, China FDA. It's so funny. Their architect were former employee of FDA. So pretty much he rebuilt the NMPA model after FDA. So actually, when the US and China were still friends, Rick Parstor and a lot of FDA higher officials visit China at least once per year. They used to have a joint workshop to teach the Chinese regulator how to do drug efficiently. Now, actually, China, oftentimes I would say today, probably more reliable than the FDA. Just looking at what happened to the FDA recently. Too political, unfortunately. It's really bad for US biotech. China less, right? So actually, I remember again from the report, for that side, pretty much they keep what had been working very well from FDA and put a little bit innovation. You can say they are more adventurous, which is the case actually for an MPA compared to the US FDA, right? Now you talk about clinical trial, something you already know. Everyone would tell you China do first human trial answer 3 times faster than United States. Why is that? I mean, you can ask them, they have a lower standard or they have a more flexibility to do first human trial, especially for CAR T or cell therapy in general. They can do this called IIT, investigator initial study, without kind of getting all those kind of, let's say, a lot of regulation from the NMPA, the central governmental agency, right? So that really gives them a lot of advantage, including a recent example, the Belgian company SL Biotech, right? They did their first human trial in vivo CAR T in China, get a 1 patient data. That data was impressive enough. The company was acquired by AstraZeneca. It's a European biotech, right? So that's a classic example. If you think about in vivo CAR T, such a wonky idea. If you were to do this in Europe or in US, good luck. I don't know how many IRB meetings, how many like FDA meetings you can have. So that's really the regulatory and a little bit of academic center part. Now let's go back to academic center. That's really a bottleneck if you think about it. You want to like an innovative drug, first in human trial, how to do it. Well, first in human, once you expand to, let's say, phase 1B, you need 100 patients. How fast can you enroll? That's the advantage of China in terms of, like you said, the metropolitan area. Sichuan, I don't know, probably have like over 100 million population. And Shanghai by itself, 25, the metropolitan area is 100 million. right? So if you are sitting those like a teaching hospital as one of those top physician scientists, right, you have so many patient resources you can play with,
Yeah.
right? So that's the one. Another one is if you China, let's say they want to do like a large scale trial, the center then it will include for their, let's say, phase 2 trial is going to be much fewer than the center if you were to want to try in Europe or in the US. But of course, the huge caveat is that they can be China only data, right? Which FDA doesn't like it. Europe actually better. Europe typically even this mostly a Chinese patient with a minority of let's say Caucasian patient, they're okay. But US is more stringent. But anyway, that's the physician part, right? So like the clinical trial part, because the patient resources are really concentrated in a much smaller number of a high volume teaching hospital.
Yeah.
Now go back to the government side. What's the incentive for the government to do this, right? When the central government write that into the local government heads KPI, they have incentive, right? You just as a VC, former VC, I would say, no, you want a good behavior, give people right incentive, right? You want the government to behave, local government behave that way. You want the industry policy really get executed, give them the right incentive. But this also go back to the dark side of this kind of a centralized planning system. Sometimes when they give the incentive with a good intention but bad protocol, you have a pretty bad outcome. Remember I said China have like thousands of biotech companies. I can tell you vast majority of them going to die. That's a huge waste of capital, talents, and resources, right? Sometimes the local government have a wrong incentive. They say, okay, I'm going to be here for 5 years, 10 years, right? I need to build a biotech park. Even there's a lot of biotech park in China. I only talk to you about the successful one. The majority of them are failure, right? The party contribute to the huge like local government debt, right? You probably heard about that's a debt from China. There's a dark side of it. Don't just look at the Chinese outcome. There's a lot of kind of waste, pretty unfortunate, undesirable outcomes as well.
Can you give us a few numbers if possible? What is the speed or cost difference if we go to China? I mean, there's been these anecdotes in the media that it's so much faster, it's cheaper. Is it different or is it just the scale of volume?
So pretty much if you are doing early stage through phase 1 clinical study, let's say if you are Shanghai-based biotech, 30 minutes travel radius, you can get everything done. Especially when you do oncology, right? That's a kind of such an established modality and disease area. So that really make everything much more efficient, right? So in the same park, you have a multiple service provider choose from, right? They can pay a visit in your office, discuss with you. You don't need to schedule a meeting. You say, I want to meet with you. Probably half an hour later, someone going to be in your office, right? So that gives them a lot of advantage, obviously, in terms of speed up their stuff. And because of that, they kind of concentrate their location. And also there's a lot of support from the government, let's say because you all together give a little bit of tax break or something like that. So the cost definitely reduce. And one thing we have to always remember for biotech, I think probably for this the largest cost is talent, how much you're going to pay those people. Don't forget all those pipetting, animal testing, those stuff. If you look at those employees, I think their salary is probably 1/10 the salary of people from Boston. And you probably heard about this infamous number called like a 996 in China, which means that you'll start working 9 a.m. until 9 p.m. 6 days per week. That's a minimal requirement if you're in biotech or any tech in China. All right, 996. So we know how many hours we work in Kindle Square or I don't know, in other places. Like I said, the education quality is largely comparable. They put more hours, right? And the cost much less. And if you have, let's say, raise the same amount of money as a company in the US in Kindle Square and the one from Shanghai, the Pharma Valley, they just can hire at least 5 times more people than you are. And the per person's hours per week, probably also 2 times. Now you should not be surprised. Their productivity is typically 5 to 10 times of the same amount of money you spend in the US. Right. And because they have more people work on the same project and then they're faster, which is expected, plus all those kind of coordinated stuff. The US is we really respect patient privacy, all those kind of stuff. Even you just go to any doctor, you spend half an hour fill all the forms. Imagine you're going to do clinical trial, more forms, right? And then in the US, we really like to sue each other. So there's a legal cost for everything. Let's just add to the cost. I don't think it's wrong. It's different, right? Because the industry in China is so new, they don't have as big baggage as the one in the US. But despite that, the US definitely is still way ahead in terms of first in class. Don't get me wrong. Like MIT, Harvard, Columbia, or Stanford, they still have the larger number of brilliant biologists, physician scientists. That's no doubt, hands down, no doubt about it. But once you already have established a target like a HER2, EGFR, KRAS, GLP-1, well, be careful. Chinese make eat your lunch and your dinner and your dessert.
And now you talked about the salaries and the number of hours put in, but if I invest $1 in Boston and $1 in China, what can I expect? I mean, return on investment.
Yeah.
How much more would I get in China?
First of all, as a foreign investor, you cannot invest in China, right? You remember our beloved president don't like Chinese, so they prevent all the U.S. companies to invest in China. So forget about that. But we business people are very smart, figure out a way. I'll give you one example. Smart people can figure out. Go back to the story of Verdiva, right? Verdiva raised $411 million. I guess their pre-money or post-money valuation must be around $1 billion, even north of it. Right, since the raise of $411 million. And it's a clinical stage obesity biotech company, the lead asset in phase 2. You put all those words together, the benchmark going to be Structured Therapeutics, Viking, like Macera, right? Those companies like somewhere between 1 to 4 billion, right? So I think fair to say Verdiva is in that neighborhood as well, because they are phase 2, obesity biotech company, and have 2 amylin, which you probably know very well. Look at the news. How much Verdiva spent to get those obesity assets from China? $17 million. That's how much they pay for that from them. I think it's a good deal. And those guys are very good and funding the valuable asset and put into this new company. So you are talking about the yes investment, $1 good return. The typical strategy would not work, but I'm pretty sure Verdiva's investor gonna harvest a lot of value, right? Because their cost basis is very low.
Yeah.
And of course, for the biotech today, the primary actually strategy is really about get acquired by big pharma. And if you use a recent kind of a transaction obesity as a reference, I think it's safe to say they're going to have a pretty handsome return. But of course, under a condition, they would be able to exit, which under a condition, they should reproduce the data from those Chinese assets, which is a big, kind of a scary unknown factor. Actually scare away a lot of Western investor or potential buyers of Chinese innovation.
Yeah, and on this podcast, we talk a lot about pressure on return on investment in biopharma and R&D productivity. So maybe this is what will actually change it long-term on the global scale. But what is the impact on US biotech and EU biotech?
Honestly, I don't know. First of all, I tell people it sounds like exciting for China. That sounds really scary to the US biotech, the European biotech, right? A lot of my friends who do not understand the China biotech, but are working for the US biotech, just feel like threatened or scared or like afraid what's really going on. Today, even big pharma, the talk of a town for this week is the most favored nation, right? For the price and stuff. I'm pretty sure you have a lot of people talk about that. So now go back to your question, the China biotech stuff. I think likely different scale, they're going to be here to stay. We have to learn, especially our Western biotech peers, companies that need to learn how to coexist with them or leverage them. Don't forget that Verdiva is a British biotech company. They are one of us. And I think they're doing fairly well. And they don't treat the China biotech as a threat, but as a great opportunity, economic. And don't forget, their 2 leading investors are Forbion and General Atlantic. They're two of the best investors in our industry. They also don't treat the China biotech as a threat, but as a great opportunity. Right? So I think that's the right attitude. Because my personal view is that they're going to stay like that. They will not, it's not one-time thing. I already told you the structural basis behind it.
Yeah.
Right? That will not go away. There's no way to have hundreds of thousands of people say, you know what, China biotech sucks. You should find another job out of this industry. How can you ask those people in their late 50s to try to find another job? That's the only thing they know how to do it and make a living.
Right. Leon, can I have a speculative sub-question to this, right? Because now we're also discussing a lot about biotechs and should they be afraid or do they need to learn how to coexist with the Chinese biotech companies? But 10 years down the road, if China also picks up on the clinical capabilities, should big pharma start to be afraid? Because now, of course, pharma can leverage the cheap assets they can buy in China. But once China isn't selling those assets, now they want to develop them themselves. Right, and now all of a sudden a possible threat.
That's another thing. I'm still very much Chinese in thinking and philosophy, right? Yin and yang always in my mind when I look at everything. There's never black and white. I'll give you an example. 2 companies, one from US, one from Europe, to tell you, I think they probably figure out a way to deal with this. Do you know AstraZeneca have 14,000 employees in China? That's the size of pretty much 70% size of BMS. But like the size of bigger than a Vertex or like a Regeneron. By the way, AstraZeneca have 5 global R&D center, two of them in China, right? One in Shanghai, they just opened another one in Beijing. So for those pharma company, they're never local, they're global.
We
Right?
already see this symbiosis, so to speak. So Seneca is one example of the coexistence.
Exactly. Yeah. The starting point was wrong. Oftentimes, politicians, they have their job, right? They are working only for their country, but company not necessarily. By the way, Merck have more than 10,000 employees in China as well.
That's impressive.
Actually, didn't know those that.
Now, so this one saying that they already start doing this way back. They just don't advertise.
How sustainable do you think the Chinese biotech scene is? At least in the past, there must have been capital available, but is that capital drying out? What's the outlook?
Yeah, so going to be fewer company, that's my guess. Fewer company, or at least will not grow as crazy as they used to be. That's definitely for sure. But I think actually before, take just the EV, for example. Now the world feel the pressure of a Chinese electric vehicle. You guys are from Europe, you probably saw increasing number of BYD on the streets. And that's a very good example. I think the biotech industry probably, I would say, 3 to 5 years behind electric vehicle. So the best case scenario, they're going to follow that trend. The worst case scenario, something similar, but they will never go away. So typically in China, it's like the government, their strategy is we're going to support anything, like kind of our strategic industry, with a very little discretion. They pretty much, they use a metaphor. There's like a brown land. We want to cultivate a garden or something. We're going to give the best, the strongest fertilizer to the ground, and everything going to grow. And then start chopping away the thing I don't want by starve them with any kind of a water supply or like capital or fertilizer. The strong one going to survive. And some of those, how to say, redwood tree going to grow out of it. Right? That's the idea. So I think this, the China, my sense of their innovative drug industry get into a second phase, start trimming. And you already saw some company taking shape, become globally competitive. I'll give you some specific name there. Again, this is my personal opinion, not the investment advice, disclosed. So really just some example, I really like this company, like a Henry, right? Henry, if you look at the history, was a state-owned company, really obscure, nobody care, but local state-owned company. And the power couple, Dr. Sun and his wife, but they took the company pretty much like a private by themselves. Henry has 20,000 employees today, by revenue, one of the largest in China. I heard their revenue, about half of them come from innovative drug. Like I said, they were like obscure, no good, not famous, like low-end generic company. That's where they get started. And you probably heard recently, Calera, their full assay obesity came from Henry, right? GSK bought this long-circulating TSLP monoclonal antibody for severe asthma came from Henry. GSK paid $1.4 billion for some middleman, not Henry directly. And then Henry recently out-licensed their small molecule drug for cardiometabolic disease to Merck US NSD, right? For $200 million upfront payment. So pretty impressed with transformation. So I think that's a very good example of traditional one. Another example is about the innovative duality bio. I actually know all the founder very well. They are good representation of a new generation of biotech in China, from China. I think company less than 5 years old, they just did IPO in Hong Kong, and their stock price jumped more than 100% on the IPO day and stayed there. The ADC company, right? Like I said, ADC is something China's really good at because it's incremental engineering play, right? So they did that, and the company, like I said, less than 5 years old, and they're really on the back of the boom of licensing. The company have a first breakthrough. They out-licensed their phase 1 HER2 ADC to Biotech. That deal gave them $175 million upfront payment. That's their first major deal. And then they have a series of deals after that with a Western company. So that really set a foundation. People look at, wow, the worst case scenario, this company can just keep doing licensing deal.
So you're basically showcasing the model for sustainability, how some of these companies will actually grow up to eventually become maybe the Pfizers of China. Do you think they might also start to do first in class? So that will be maybe the third generation R&D organizations in China, or what's your view on that?
I think first in class already happened, right? If you think about Kiso, Sami story is a first in class. You all target, but they are the first one to do this bispecific based on some new understanding. So, but of course, some academics say, no, that's not a first in class. 2 targets already established have a drug approved. No, that's too stringent, right? So that already happened. Even like a first in class target, a new target, I already saw an ADC poster from China. Already happened. Happened. So definitely there. But now go back to your key question. Would China have a next Eli Lilly or Novo Nordisk? I think that won't happen probably in another 10 years. Why do I say that? I think the kind of a friendly political environment is no longer there. So I could not imagine China-based large pharma could directly commercialize their product in the United States, which is most profit come from. I don't say that can happen. If all those innovative assets, you cannot keep the most value or profit to yourself. You just don't have a financial means to grow into next Eli Lilly. Eli Lilly is too far reach. The recent example is going to be Regeneron Vertex, right?
Yeah.
If you look at Regeneron Vertex, each one of them have a mega blockbuster drug, which generate literally hundreds of billions of revenue for them to get where they are today. I don't see where China big pharma can get that 100 billion of revenue from their current setup, the environment. So this part, I'm a little bit pessimistic. But I do think Beijing may have a chance, but that's why they are strategically de-emphasize their China origin and even like legally incorporate now in Switzerland, right? So now this kind of overhung risk factor is gone. So give people like 3-5 years, everyone recognizes Beijing's global biotech slash biopharma. Their revenue going to be multi-billion, probably like around 5 billion this year, right? You think about it, that's exactly what a Regeneron was 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah. So actually the model might be the new co-model where you basically set up some kind of shell somewhere else, but not in geographical China, but it's actually a China operations in the R&D.
Yeah, let's go back to Zeneca, about 14,000 employees, 5 global R&D center, 2 in China. They just happen to be initially from Europe. But in terms of operation internally, that's exactly what you are describing, right?
Yeah.
Leon, we discussed so much, but is there anything where you feel like we should still add to the conversation that wasn't mentioned?
I really feel like we have a long distance between us, but we can talk to each other. I think I really like about the people in our industry. We are truly doing something great. We are really fulfill the motto of a lot of startup, do well by doing good. I think we are absolutely doing something good. We are helping humanity. So I still remember Rockefeller. There's an auditorium. They said science for the benefit of humanity. That's on the top of our auditorium. We go there quite often. We always look at that while those Nobel Prize winner or future Nobel Prize winner give a talk. I think people should never forget that's the purpose why this industry exists. Sometimes when we talk to people have their different agenda, tell them this is essential industry. Doesn't matter if it's Chinese, European, Korean, Singaporean. Cancer has no border. Either should we.
That's a nice reminder, and it's a really meaningful work. So what have you been reading lately? Is there something on your shelves that is keeping you up at night?
So I'm a big fan of sci-fi. And there's a book called The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu. It's my childhood hero. When I was young and high school, he's really popular. I didn't realize after I left China, he wrote this like a masterpiece called Three-Body Problem. I heard President Obama loved that book as well. So it's a hardcore sci-fi. It's about the end of a universe, how small we are when the civilization clash against each other. It's a trilogy, 3 book, right? So the Three-Body Problem is the first book. Second one, I believe, is The Dark Forest. The last one is the pretty much End of the World. I read all of them, listened to all of them. I sometimes remind myself all those struggle, the conflict, the hatred, sometimes really nothing. If you put yourself into his fictionary future in the scale of billions of years, in the context of a multi-civilizations conflict, we're just a piece of sand in the universe.
We mentioned also some papers. Your paper will, of course, link to it on our group and when we post this on LinkedIn. If people would like to reach out to you, where should they reach you? Would it be LinkedIn?
LinkedIn is the best one, especially our international audience. I don't think they have a WeChat. Most of them don't. Some of them do. I know a lot of European executives in this industry interested in China, but do have WeChat.
Your company, InScienceWeTrust BioAdvisory, could you describe what challenges you help people with?
Yeah, the opportunity, also a problem for our industry really is that R&D costs need to go down dramatically, no matter what. You see everything's kill your top line, right? MFN, like IRA, like short-term patent expiration, duration, everything's just shrink your top line, make it more difficult. So your R&D costs have to go down to survive as a big pharma. To go back to your favorite ROI, to keep that already pretty bad one, you have to really shrink our R&D. So China Biotech offer opportunity to dramatically reduce R&D. And once the big pharma, look like big pharma get used to this, right? Latest number, 42% of major externally sourced assay by mid-April came from China. 42%. This year may break the 50% threshold, very likely.
Yeah.
Imagine if that happened,
Yeah.
right? What I'm doing is, on one hand, because I think it is going to happen, whether you like or not, right? I'm going to help the Western company, like I said, to leverage the rise of Asian biotech, not just China, by the way. South Korea doing really well. Singapore is really coming up. The Asian biotech industry is coming up. How to leverage that, make ourselves still competitive, still relevant. The biotech, the investor, big pharma, right? Big pharma, they are fine. They just hire 5 people in China, set up a team. But really for the small guy, you only have one BD person. How can you leverage that? That's one hand. That's relevant to your audience. Of course, Asian biotech, sometimes they do a little bit lack of a business connection and knowledge. I have that as well. But mainly for the Western biotech investor, I think this Asian biotech boom is really special China. So instead of a fight your enemy, join them.
Very wise words. Let's conclude with those. Leon, it's been a tremendous pleasure having you on the podcast. Such a fascinating topic. So thank you again so much and take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Martin. Talk
Thank you
soon.
very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So, Simon, this was our episode with Leon Jun Tang. So what did you take away from it?
Martin, I think we found R&D productivity finally. Now a few episodes in here on the podcast, but I think it was impressive, the story that Leon had to tell on the scale and speed, determination, talent, the infrastructure around the Chinese biotech boom. And I think the obvious speed, efficiency, cost efficiency we have in that system. It's probably a tough system to work in as a worker if you have to follow the 996 model. So start 9 a.m. and finish 9 p.m. 6 days a week. This could be a template for R&D productivity. What do you think?
I fully agree. I think some of the numbers that Leon were saying were absolutely mind-boggling, right? The efficiency, the speed, and all of that. And I think it just reminded me a little bit of the discussion we had with Murray Aitken when he was saying that Corona proved us that it's possible. All the people, they were always available, working hard, really pushing forward. And then when Leon was describing all these hubs in China, everything being in one place within a 30-minute distance, everyone working 996, I think that's a living proof that it can be done, right? At what cost? That's a question, but it can be done.
The salaries are, let's say, 1/10 or whatever of a US, EU salary. Your dollars will take you a lot further down the development trajectory for your molecules. That's a hard system to beat anywhere else in the world. And of course, we can come back to, I mean, is it real innovation or is it more copycat innovation, as we also discussed? But I think it's, as you say, the infrastructure, this co-location of CROs, hospitals, biotech companies. I think it's just designed and set up for efficiency from the get-go.
Whether it is innovation or it's copycatting, right? They figured something out. It's not just copycatting and having Me Too's, right? It's, as he said, it's these super Me Too's, and they are better in something than other things. So they really figured out either how to re-engineer it or engineer it in the right way. But it's not just Me Too's that they are producing. It's innovation that comes out of there. It's a player. It's a global player.
And we discussed with Leon also, it becomes a little bit semantic when it's something really first in class and so on. But Leon made the case that we start to see first in class drug candidates and drugs coming out of the Chinese ecosystem. So I think it's not fair to the Chinese biotech system to say it's copycat, because it's definitely not. And also the talent, I mean, these are super skilled and experienced biopharma professionals trained across the globe, or even in China as well. There's so many well-known CDMOs, CROs in China, so they have all the ingredients to make something that is truly innovative and with R&D productivity at the same time.
We had it in some of the episodes, I believe, before, right? I think it's really all the things coming together, right? So as you said, it's the talent. The talent is really exceptional, world-class, combined with the funding, right? The power that they are really devoting to it. I think it's all the parts of the recipe, all the ingredients, they came really in together. And now they are really able to push it. And I mean, now they're able to push it to some way. So I would also argue right now it's a great opportunity. And we can see huge deals that the Western companies are paying to the Chinese companies for these molecules, right? So it's not Me Too's, as you said, it's not really copycats. There are huge amounts of money now being paid to China buy Western companies because they can see the value in them. But I would also start to question, I mean, when I was listening to Leon and he was mentioning that, right now they are great at bringing it to phase 1. I mean, let's just see what happens once they are able to bring it from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 and then commercialize, right? I think they can really be a force if they get all the way there. And I mean, as Leon said, right now they're already, it's not just Chinese talent that was educated out there that starts to come back. Now it starts to be Western talent that also start to come in. And I think if they really combine all of this talent and the funding and the infrastructure they have and these hubs, these huge hubs where everything is on one spot, right? I think they can really be a force to reckon with. And I mean, then it will be very interesting to see where can they take it from there.
I think we have not seen the final format of the Chinese model yet. So as you say, Martin, that once the system becomes more sustainable and each company can hold on to the molecules for longer, then we get this virtuous cycle from the Chinese perspective where you can start to have the biotech companies grow up to become profitable pharma companies with a global presence. I think then suddenly also the value flowing back to the Chinese ecosystem will be much larger, because even if we see a certain number of $1 billion flowing in deal value to China, it's still relatively few dollars, you could say. So it's not enough to fuel the fire in a sustainable manner. To have that, you probably need to have these well-established pharma companies that become profitable. So they have to grow up. He used the fertilizer analogy supported by the Chinese government. You throw a lot of fertilizer and have a lot of companies sprout, and then you chop down, or they will chop down themselves, and there'll be some survivors that then grow up to mature into profitable companies potentially. I think we're still seeing that it's maturing, the whole ecosystem, which is quite interesting.
And I think, as you mentioned, right now we finally found productivity. I would say we found one part of the productivity, right? Really the efficiency part. I think now it's time to finish the second part of the equation, which is really being able to commercialize it and extract the commercial value out of it. And I mean, recently I've been looking at the data where, I mean, most drugs, most of the value tends to be unlocked around proof of concept, right? So after your phase 2, so once they will be really able to hold to them all the way until the end of phase 2 and prove the concept, and either then start selling it or go even further and to be able to retain most of the value, now they start to touch really the ROI equation. And I would really love to start to see what is going to be the ROI impact on this, not just the productivity, but is it going to help the ROI in the industry?
We should expect to see the full value chain being operational in China. But even before we get there, again, if there's a, let's say, a factor of 10 difference in the cost, let's say US versus China, and Leon, he boils it down to basically an engineering problem. If we're developing antibodies or ADCs or biospecifics, to some extent it is an engineering problem. And if it's an engineering problem, you just need to throw also more resources at it to increase your likelihood of solving that problem. And if you can have a team that's 10 times the size of a team in the US, and the Chinese team subscribe to this 996 working schedule, you get more bang for your buck in China. So all things being equal, once you have a target out there, it's published in Science and Nature, then it's just attacking that target and doing your engineering. Of course, it's a little bit simplified, but that's one way of viewing the competition.
I fully agree. I fully agree. I think it's going to be interesting to see where it goes from here, right? What happens in 3, 4, 5 years, and where do they take it? Because I mean, on the other side of it, yes, you can throw bigger teams, they cost less and they work more, right? Sounds like a perfect equation. But over time, we also have to see what happens to it after, right? So if they start to bring all this talent from abroad, it will start to raise costs, right? I mean, how sustainable is it? That's the question. But of course, I mean, it is a bit less sustainable if you can't really keep the entire value for yourself. So I think once they start to be able to do that and really have the full value of the drugs and innovation they develop, I really would love to see where it goes in 5 years from now, and then see how other players that could have the resources like China, right? Like Middle East and so on, will they be able to do something similar? I mean, there are other countries that have the resources. They could put all these parts of the recipe together as well.
Yeah. And I think that was an interesting part of the conversation as well, that what were the sort of the pieces of the puzzle that were in place in China to enable the biotech boom? We also discussed this pro-STEM mechanisms in China, and you have these highly ranked universities in China, and you have the long history of CDMOs, CROs, like the Wuxi family of entities. So you basically had all in place, but you wouldn't have that in place in to the same extent in the Middle East or in some places in Scandinavia, right? Norway doesn't have the same tradition as Denmark or Sweden. It's not only money, you also need the talent, the infrastructure, and the legacy to really kickstart it, at least if you want to do it in 5 years' time. Otherwise, it will take many years. Leon was an example of one who got almost a government grant to be sent to the US to be trained. And there were many like him, and some of them grew up in the US biotech industry, and then they were annoyed maybe by not being promoted to that VP level eventually, and then they became a sea turtle and they went back to China. I doubt how reproducible it would be in another geography.
And I think, as you said, right, it wasn't just 5 years. It's actually, I mean, the underlying factors, they were there for decades, right? So it was a really, really long-term investment. So I think one important thing is it's not just the money that are required. It's really money you will invest for long time. How many countries would be able to do it with a 30, 40, 50-year horizon ahead, that I will invest this now, so maybe in 30 years I will have all this that can come back, right?
Also the competitiveness of biotech in the EU are being discussed, and we had the Draghi report and all this. It just shows that you also need that patience in the political system, and that's something you absolutely have in a system like the Chinese one. They're very, very patient in the outlook and have 5-year plans and longer plans. But if you have like an election cycle of 4 years somewhere, then it's maybe more difficult to put this in place. But I think, of course, money will get you some of the way. But I think there's something around the Middle East we need to dig into, and maybe get a guest on board to see what's cooking there. Is it really, are these bottlenecks? What can we learn from China? Can we reproduce it elsewhere? I think that could be an interesting exercise.
And I think that's a little bit what we didn't cover, and that's why also I mentioned Middle East, right? We discussed with him Africa, India, and I think the reason why Middle East really came up to mind is that, as we just discussed, it's the money that can be invested for long term. And I don't think there's many countries who could do it, but I think Middle East is almost like a private company where they have all the money, they are there for decades. They can put them up, wait for 30 years, and then see what happens with it, right? I think that was a big part, at least from what I heard from Leon. I think that was a big part of the recipe, right? It's not just the money, it's not just the talent, it's the patience, because that's what it takes in this industry, right? And I mean, that also what resulted in this growth.
We learned a lot from this episode because we really saw here a system in one geography that seems very conducive to enhancing R&D productivity and compete in a very interesting manner with the life science industry in the West. Let's continue the journey, Martin, and let's see if we can cover other geographies.
And I fully agree. I think we need to explore the other parts, because 5 years ago, maybe we wouldn't talk about China, and now China is everywhere.
Very curious also to hear your opinion out there, dear listeners. Maybe the Chinese government will completely abandon this biotech dream and then completely shift to AI and become an AI leader. Look us up on LinkedIn and join the group there. Just search for Cures and Capital podcast. And please keep your very nice feedback coming to Martin and myself in the DMs. We are very happy and grateful for all the feedback we have gotten so far. And until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening. Bye.